Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're on chapter 23, verse 10. Chapter 23, verse 10. When you go out to camp against your enemies, clearly this is some kind of military context. V'nishmarta mikol davara. You should guard yourself from anything bad. And then the Torah goes on to talk about some very detailed things having to do with if a person was ritually impure, he should leave the camp, and even talk about such a basic thing as keeping a shovel with oneself to cover one's excrement when one is out in the camp. But the introductory pasuk is this thing that when you go out to war, be careful from anything bad. What does this mean, be careful from anything bad? What are we saying with that? So if you look at the Ramban on Pasuk Yud, V'nishmar ta mikol davara, Shasatan mekatrek b'shas hasakana. So it's very interesting. According to Rashi, the idea is, that's quoting Rashi, according to Rashi, the idea is that you have to be extra special, careful of danger at a time of danger. Because really, when you think about it, when we find ourselves in a dangerous circumstance, we're essentially looking for merits that God should protect us. And so we're not perfect. So if there's this moment that in normal circumstances we would find ourselves in peril and we're counting on God to protect us, we really need to be counting on our merits. So according to Rashi, it's a very basic piece of advice. If you're in dangerous circumstances, don't push your luck. And it's fascinating that as believing Jews who believe in providence, we still say don't push your luck, because we believe God is involved, but we also believe that every time God needs to intervene and stop events from occurring, that's merits, and you don't have all the merits we necessarily need in this world. So that's a very practical pshat. But then the Ramban goes on. What the Ramban thinks is correct regarding this matter is the Torah is giving us advice at a time where it's very understandable that a person would be sinning. Vayadua b'minhag hamachanos hayotzos lamochama ki yochlu kol toeva v'yigzalu v'yachmasu v'lo yisposhashu afilu b'niyov v'chol nevala. It is known that when people go out to war, they eat things they normally wouldn't eat. They steal, they plunder. There's no shame in despicable activities. And the idea is, this is actually one of the famous explanations for why there's even the allowance of taking the woman in battle that we had at the beginning of the parsha. It's just a time where our normal standards are not necessarily up to snuff because people are very aggressive in those moments. Hayashar bivnei adam betivo yislabish achzarius v'chema b'tzeis machne aloivav. A person who conducts himself extremely appropriately by nature with other people, all of a sudden, when he finds himself at war, is likely to be in a state of cruelty and wrath. And the Ramban says that's what it's talking about. It's not talking about not pushing your luck with dangerous circumstances. It's talking about be on your guard, spiritually speaking, more so than normal, because you're likely to stumble in a different way. So he says the straightforward meaning here is be careful of anything that is ra, that is prohibited. Let's just go to the Orach Chaim for a second. Orach Chaim and Pasuk Yud Teitzei Machaneh Perush Hagam sheyesh dikduki averos sheHashem lo yanish aleihem v'im yanish ya'onesh kal modia akasav shebashas hasakana shubazman sheyotzim aloiveim tzrichet shmir mikol dikduki averos. The Orach Chaim is sort of a little bit of a compromise in Rashi and the Ramban. What he says the pshat is there are all kinds of sins. Listen, none of us are perfect. And there are certain types of averos that we probably do with somewhat of a regular basis. And though we know we're not supposed to do any sins, we sort of have this little voice inside of ourselves that says to us, look, if God hasn't punished me terribly for this yet, I'm probably going to be okay. So he's saying at a time of danger, one has to be careful even about more subtle types of halachos, because we need all the merits we could get. So that's what I mean. It's a little bit of a combination between Rashi and the Ramban. Okay, let's now go on to chapter 24, verse 13. We're talking about the idea of lending money to a poor person and lending money to a poor person when there was a collateral given. So let's actually start with verse 12, chapter 24, verse 12. Vim ish anihu lo sishkav ba'avoto. If he's a poor person, don't go to sleep at night with his collateral. 13. So basically, if he gave you a sweatshirt as a collateral, so he might need the sweatshirt to keep himself warm at night. So every night before the sun sets, every evening, you need to bring him back his sweatshirt. And so therefore he'll be able to go to sleep that night with his blanket or sheet or whatever it is, whatever the collateral was. And it will be for you a righteousness before Hashem your God. Obviously, the obvious question here is, what good is the collateral if every time he needs it, I bring it back to him? Wouldn't we say that part of the idea of a collateral is a motivation for the person to pay back? But the idea over here is yes, we want him to have a reminder to pay back, and presumably the fact that you have this collateral that you keep on trading back and forth with him acts as a reminder, but we don't want his life to be any more difficult. It's a very interesting thing to think about. But on this mitzvah, on this pasuk, is a kliyakar. Kliyakar on pasuk Yud Gimel. It's about 10 or 15 lines into the kliyakar. It's around the middle of the kliyakar. He says, "Upshuto kefel hashev tashiv." It's interesting. At the beginning of verse 13, there was a double language of returning. Hashev tashiv. Both of those words mean return. Lomar shebechol yom v'yom yashiv lo. Every day I have to bring it back to him. That's why it says it in double language. It's not a one-time thing. It's daily. Tomer, if you ask, Im kain hafuchi matarta lamali, Im b'cholayla ani machzir lo v'enani rak shomer shelo bayom. What in the world is the purpose of my bringing it back and forth to him every day? Like, if the point is that at night he has to have it, why am I even holding on to this thing? How's that Omar? So as a response to this, says the Kliyakar, is the second half of verse 13. Ulecha tiyet staka. It will be for you a righteousness before Hashem. Ki doma lefnei Hashem lokecha, ki lebechol yom vayom atanosin lo tzedaka chadasha. In God's eyes, it's like each day you're giving him back a charitable gift. In other words, really, I have the collateral, and I rightfully have the collateral because I'm the lender, and he hasn't paid me back yet. And each day I'm bringing it back to him when he needs it. So you might say, what do I need the schlepping for? The answer is because I have a constant mitzvah. Every time I go back, it's another mitzvah. It's another chesed in the eyes of Hashem, your God. Right? So it's an interesting idea. Skipping about 6 lines or so. In the straightforward meaning of the verse, the pasuk is telling us a very beautiful idea. Vani gonasti la'atzmi. So Munbas the king would share his treasury with other people. And his line was, my predecessors buried things away for others. As when you think about it, I could share things with other people, or I could just keep it all in my treasury. And how many things in my treasury do I ever even end up using? Really, I'm putting it away in my treasury that at some point, hopefully many years from now, my heirs will have it. So Munbaz, when he would share his assets with other people, he would say, my predecessors who wouldn't share, everything they treasured away was for others because they weren't even going to use it during their lifetimes. It was for their heirs. I, by sharing, am treasuring away for myself. Because every time I share with someone, it's beneficial to me. It's a good deed. It's helping me as a person. To me, it's a charity. Avosai ganzu b'makom shayad sholetes, v'ani gonasti b'makom she'ein hayad sholetes. My predecessors hid things away in a place that the hand could reach. You just need to know the combination. And one of these days, someone's going to break into the vault. And then they'll be able to take everything my predecessors saved. Me, what I'm storing away, Nobody could take it away from me. It's in heaven. It's my spirituality. It's my good deeds. Since this act of charity is before God, so it's really mine. When I do this act of charity, the greatest beneficiary is really myself. Just an interesting thing to think about. Okay. Chapter 25, verse 6. In this part of the parsha, the Torah is talking about a levirate marriage, just extremely briefly, in a scenario where a man passes away not having had any surviving progeny. So if he has a brother, there's a mitzvah for his widow to marry his brother, and the Torah term for that is yibum. They don't have to do it. If they don't want to do it, they could do something called chalitza. The practical halacha today is we don't do yibum, we just always do chalitza. But it is very important to know that that widow, in a circumstance where there was no biological child, that widow is prohibited from marrying anyone else until she does chalitza with the brother. But in any event, when there was a levirate marriage, we say in verse 6, excuse me, the first child that is born from this levirate marriage, Yakum al Shem Achiv Hames, will stand on the name of his deceased brother, Israel, and his name will not be wiped out from Israel. Okay, this is I think one of the most difficult to understand psukim in the Chumash, because everybody reads this pasuk, and it's a question I've been asked so many times. So does this mean that when there's a child born from the levirate marriage, the child is supposed to be named after the deceased spouse? Doesn't it sound that way from the pasuk? The child stands or exists on the name of the deceased brother. So if you look at Rashi, it's the third Rashi of pasuk Vav, Yakum Hashem Achiv, Zeshiyibe Mis Ishto, Yito Nachlas Hameis B'Nichsei Aviv. So Rashi says, you know what it means? That that the child stands in the place of the brother. So Rashi says it means something very technical. It means that the brother who's performing the levirate marriage gets the deceased brother's share of the family inheritance. So like this child is sort of standing in the place of the brother. But I just want to see the Ramban very quickly. The Ramban on Hasak Vav is somewhere. I just have to find it. Yeah. V'tam einenu kipshuto. It's not like the straightforward meaning. That's not the case. And the greatest proof is Megillas Rus, because he says Boaz does Yibum with Naomi, right? And they have a child. So is the first child named Machlon after Naomi's deceased husband? No. The Ramban says the pshat in the pasuk is not saying the halach is named in a certain way. It's a statement that there'll be a legacy for the deceased brother through this child. That's the pshat in the pasuk. So we discussed this morning what it means that when you go to war, be careful of any bad things, because Rashi, the Ramban, and the Orach Chaim. We discussed the Kli Yakar about the practice of giving back the collateral to the poor man, and we discussed Rashi and the Ramban regarding what it means that the child from the levirate marriage will stand in the place of the deceased brother.